This is the James Arnold Mansion, formerly and still is the Wamsutta Club. Very important property in the city's history. James Arnold was a Providence Quaker who moved to New Bedford and married into one of the biggest family in the city at the time. They brought commercial whaling to New Bedford. It was called the Rotch family, R-O-T-C-H, Rotch. And he married one of the Rotch daughters. Became very wealthy, working as an agent for whaling ships like most of the people did in New Bedford that had money. This is around the early couple of decades of the 19th century, 1800 to 1820. And in 1820, he built this house here. Now, it wasn't this house in particular. I mean, it was the part that you can see from this wall to the end, that corner there, not the third floor. And not any of these wings. It was still a big house, and it was an impressive house for the times. 2 stories. The doorway is new. Well, I'll talk about all the additions later. But the highlight of this particular property, though, was that Arnold was a very, very interested horticulturist, and he owned 11 acres on this site. Basically, it's from Union to Arnold and County to Cottage. All that land was his estate. And he developed it into this spectacular horticultural site, which is one of the most famous horticultural sites, private horticultural sites in New England, in the country actually, by the 1830s. Very well known. And he opened it up to the public. You know, it wasn't just a place that he did. He had people come by. He entertained lavishly. He was a very social man. He and his wife were very active in the community. And so they had this great property. Now, when Arnold was getting older, he knew he had to do something with the land. He had already kind of started to develop some of the houses. And those houses on Union Street, the nice Victorians on Union Street, from here to Cottage, he'd sold that lot off. That was quite a bit of land. And we'll see the next house we're going to visit was also a property that was on his site, on this site that he had given to his daughter, actually. But basically, it was a big lot. He wanted to give it to the city of New Bedford as a park, really, because it was a nice horticultural park, had a house on it and so forth. But they didn't want the property, so he ended up willing it to his nephew. But he also gave, because he was so interested in horticulture and he wanted to have some kind of the estate be a legacy for himself and horticulture, that he gave $100,000 of his estate to Harvard University. And he told them, whatever you do with this money, make sure it has something to do with plants, trees, etc. And with that money, Harvard University bought a huge plot of land in Jamaica Plain, and now that is the Arnold Arboretum, one of the largest and most beautiful parks that celebrates trees, mostly. That's what that was all about, but it's still a fabulous park. Pretty easy to get to. It's right off the old Jamaica Way if you're going up to Boston through the Fenway and so forth, and it's a beautiful spot. And so the Arnold Arboretum is named after James Arnold here, who passed away in 1868, and really as visible and as important as this house is to New Bedford, the site, probably the Arnold Arboretum is his greatest lasting legacy, because it's quite a place. It's not going anywhere, and it's treasured by everybody in the Boston area. So interesting guy, James Arnold. The man that he willed the house to, William J. Rotch was his name. We're actually going to see his first house in a little while. He remodeled the original house into a spectacular Victorian house. There are lots of pictures of this house online, as it was when it was finished around 1875. A magnificent house. He put the 3rd floor on. He had ornamentation all around the house, towers, all that stuff that was the Victorian architecture was known for was added to the house. The doorway here is the Victorian addition. That's not the original doorway that he would have put in, but was done during the 1870s when the next man owned the house. It was a beautiful building. But when William J. Rotch and his died, and his large family decided that they didn't want the house anymore. They gave it to other organizations, and it ended up with the Wamsutta Club, which was a very, very important social club. All the wheelers and dealers and movers and shakers in New Bedford were members of this club. It was the club to belong to, and they did all these additions. They put their dining rooms on 2 dining rooms on either side, kitchen in the back. They stripped off all the ornamentation that was on the house, the Victorian ornamentation that was on the house. And basically the house has been unchanged in this form since about 1920. That's when the last big change to the house was made. All the property on the other side of Orchard Street was sold off as residential properties. The Roosevelt also was on the site. That was actually developed by the daughters in the 1920s. So, during this period from 1900 to the Great Depression, the textile industry was king here. The amount of economy and money that was in New Bedford is beyond our comprehension, really. It's one of the fastest growing and sort of wealthiest places. A lot of the wealth was in a limited number of hands, but nonetheless, there was tremendous development here, and the Wamsutta Club was sort of the center of it, really, because all the big deals in the textile industry were members, and this is where things happened and were decided here. I just want to make this is a great house. It's a Colonial Revival by a famous architect, native-born architect by the name of Nat Smith. He did a lot of great buildings. He's the one who redesigned the downtown library, because the downtown library used to be the city hall, and he redesigned that when there was a fire in that building, and he did a beautiful job. He's got houses all over the place in commercial buildings and schools and stuff. And he did this building here in 1902. Now, the reason I wanted to point this out, because this house has a feature that is very, very rare, and that's the curved glass window in that bay there. Curved glass. Now, that was in 1902 when this house was built. That was a very, very difficult, it still is a difficult thing to do, to mold a curved glass for a window. I mean, you can make it for some things, but for a window, it was very difficult now, and it was difficult then. And you can see the 3 of them right here. There's another bay there, and the house behind it also has curved glass windows. So kind of an interesting feature on this house. The money was here for the builders and the buyers to go the extra yard to continue to buy high quality buildings. On this site rather, and then from Arnold to Clinton, and then from Clinton to Maple, on each of those blocks there was one gigantic mansion. On this site here, it was the man's name was Thomas Hathaway. He had a Greek revival on this site, dated from like 1840s. And on the next block, from Clinton to Maple, there was a magnificent, one of the great Victorian mansions, a 3-story brick Italianate mansion. He was owned by Jonathan Bourne, who was a very famous whaler. The Bourne building at the Whaling Museum is named after him and his family. He was a big deal in town, very kind of an eccentric, really, in lots of ways, but he had a lot of money. And his house on this site, the site between Clinton and Maple, was really fantastic. Probably one of the great mansions ever built in the city. There's pictures of that. Just look up Jonathan Bourne on Google and Wikipedia, and it'll probably show a picture of his house. Quite a big. Oh yeah, long gone. Yeah. Now, what replaced them are all these big mansions. Actually, this was there was such a crush for executive housing during the textile era, because the textile was bringing people from all over, not just local, not just New England even. There were executives coming from all over the world to work at the New Bedford textile industry because it was growing, it was making a lot of money. And so they knocked down these big mansions and put up other mansions. They didn't have very big lots, but there's probably on each of these blocks is like 12 houses like this in each of those blocks. And they sold it like hotcakes. They couldn't find enough land, actually, for all these places, and they ended up demolishing old houses and putting up new ones. This is one of the great Victorians in the city. It was designed by a very famous architectural firm at the time of in the Victorian period called Peabody and Stearns. Peabody and Stearns was a national company. They did a lot of buildings in New England, but also in the rest of the country as well. It was a very well-known firm. Peabody was actually born in New Bedford. His father was a minister at the Unitarian Church. His name is Ephraim Peabody. And unfortunately, he didn't stay long in New Bedford, but he did stay long enough to have Robert Swain Peabody to be born. And he designed this particular house. He just went to Europe. He was always well connected to New Bedford because his middle name was Swain, and he knew the people that owned the Swain School, and they helped him with his career after his father died to get going. Anyway, this house is a very cool building, nicely painted. It's got all the bells and whistles of the Victorian style and the Queen Anne. The Queen Anne style was popular. This is a pretty earlier version of the Queen Anne, 1870s, mid-1870s. The big porch, the 3 levels of siding, which this has has clapboards on the first level, shaped shingles on the second level, and then they have the fancy work on the third level above. Nice building. I know you probably saw the way that the driveway is covered. It's called a porte cochere. Very cool detail of this house. You could come and drive in with your carriages and get let off without getting wet. Always a nice thing. That's one of the nice things about my house. I have a attached garage. I love that part. Anyway, one of the other things that the Peabody and Stearns did, they actually built the original breakers in Newport. Where the breakers is now, spectacular, magnificent, centerpiece of the Newport mansions. There was another mansion there at one point. Huge wooden mansion, designed by Peabody and Stearns for a man named Pierre Lorillard, who was a tobacco baron, actually. It's a huge mansion, looked somewhat like this, except maybe 3 times the size. And Lorillard sold it to the Vanderbilts, but then it burned down around 1890. And they replaced the original wood mansion. You can see pictures of that. All I have to do is go into the Peabody and Stearns website or Wikipedia listing, and you can pull up the breakers. It'll show what it looked like, and you'll say, gee, it looks an awful lot like this house here, because it did. Anyway, they were well known for they did actually 3 houses in a row here. I'm only going to talk about this one. There was one in this empty lot here. Now you can see where the driveway was for that house. That house was a pretty big house. It was very long and narrow to fit in this lot. It burned down around 1940, actually. And the house on the corner, which we'll just walk by, I'm not going to talk about that house, but we're going to walk by. It's a huge building in the Colonial Revival style. So they were mixing and matching styles, even though they were building this house all about the same time. This house is the William J. Rotch Cottage, Gothic Cottage, 1846. This house is probably New Bedford's most famous, architecturally anyway, residential property. Someone asked if any of the houses are on the historic register, and this one is. As a matter of fact, not only is it on the historical register, it's a landmark project, a landmark house. That means that's the highest preservation award that is given in the United States, and the plaque is right here if you want to look at it. Landmark status. There's only like four buildings, I think, in New Bedford that have landmark status. The Siemens Bethel, I think RJD, and the Frederick Douglass House on 7th Street. I think there may be another one other than this one and those 3, but I think those are the only buildings in New Bedford that have landmark status. So it's very, very well known. It was designed in 1846 by a top architect in this style. His name was Alexander Jackson Davis, and his client was William J. Rotch, the man who was willed the Wamsutta Club. Now, it's a pretty big house, and you can see the beautiful detailing. The Gothic is like church-like detailing with the pointed arches, the steep roof line, what the Victorians call gingerbread in the gables and so forth. All beautifully done. Just a magnificent house, very balanced. When this house was built, it was recognized even by the architect and others as being a special place. A lot of houses of this style have been built in the Hudson River Valley, in the towns maybe 30, 40 miles north of Manhattan. And the architect named Alexander Jackson Davis, who did this house, also did many of those. If you've been to Tarrytown and visited a big mansion called Lyndhurst, it's in this style as well, and it's the same architect. So a very important house, very famous at the time. Now, Rotch had a big family of children. He had a lot of daughters, actually. I think he only had like one son, but he had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 daughters. He married a daughter. This is kind of an interesting story. He married a daughter of Charles W. Morgan. Everybody probably knows that name from the whale ship. Well, he was a big time whaling merchant as well. His house was where the old high school is. That's where the original one of the first houses on buildings on that site was Charles W. Morgan's site, where the old high school is now. And Rotch married one of his daughters, and they had like 6 kids in this house. And they were even at that point, apparently there were too many. There wasn't enough room for everybody. And his first wife died, and he married another daughter of Charles W. Morgan. Kind of tricky. And the thing is, they both had the same grandfather, actually. They were pretty closely related. They had the same great-grandfather, one or the other. Anyway, he felt that this house was too small, and when he was willed James Arnold's house, he decided to leave this property and redevelop the Arnold Mansion, put the 3rd floor on, which is basically nothing. If you've been on the 3rd floor of the Arnold Mansion, it's really nothing but bedrooms, and had plenty of room for his family. I think he had 2 more kids with his second wife, so he had lots of children, lots of daughters, as it turned out, as well. Now, this house here was built in 1846, and it had one of these block size lots. And in 1906, they decided that they wouldn't demolish the house. They had to develop the land. The people, the daughters and so forth that owned the property, the property stayed in the family. They didn't sell the property. They kept it in the family. But they decided that they needed to sell the lots around it because it was too big a property. And what they did actually was moved it to this site. They took it off. It was probably about where that tree is now, right behind you there. That's probably where the center of the house was. It was a block size, lot again. They just moved the house and then started building all these houses all around it. That's what happened on this site. Thank God they didn't demolish the house, because that's what they did with the others. They just moved it to a site, reduced its footprint as far as lot size dramatically, although it still has a nice lot next door here. And then that's when all these other houses, you can see a lot later than 1846, were built. It's the story on this property. Beautiful building in the Italianate style, or the Renaissance Revival, meant to imitate or mimic houses in Italy, the grand mansions in Italy, the particular features of the half-round windows, the big brackets, with the wide eaves, with the fancy brackets. Nice house. Designed by a architect from Mattapoisett. His name was Solomon Eaton. And Eaton was a very interesting guy. He did a lot of work in the South Coast. He probably did a lot of buildings in New Bedford, but, they didn't really sign their work or identify themselves as architects that much. They were mostly just, designing builders and stuff. They didn't get the recognition, really, that they thought they should get. It's a nice house, though. And it's always been associated with Herman Melville. Herman Melville's sister, whose name was Catherine Hoadley, she and her husband, John Hoadley, were recruited by the New Bedford Copper Company to run the copper mill, which was down in the waterfront in the Hicks region of New Bedford, down by the Cushnet River Antiques. Everybody knows where Revere Copper used to be. That was called the New Bedford Copper Company. And New Bedford had to have a copper company, a big copper company, because whale ships, and there were hundreds of whale ships in New Bedford in the heyday, hundreds, like maybe, there'd be 300 or 400 at sea at one time, and you'd have ships, being outfitted. It was a huge industry. And whale ships, and all wooden ships, not just whale ships, all wooden ships had to have their below the waterline hulls coppered, because all kinds of worms and all kinds of things would attach itself to the wood and create tremendous drag. They wouldn't actually eat the wood through, but they would cause so much growth to happen underneath at the waterline that it would cause too much drag on the ship. So sheathing, as they called it, copper sheathing, became a big deal, something you had to do all the time. So New Bedford had a copper company to do that. The sheets were about shingle size, and they would, you've probably seen pictures of this operation in whaling bush. You'll see the whale hipped over on its side, really, and they're all working on the bow, and that's what they're doing. They're resheathing the bottom with copper, because they had to do that after every voyage, because the whaling voyages lasted 2, 3, 4 years sometimes. So by the time they got back, they definitely had to take off all the old sheathing and put new sheathing on. That's why they had a big copper company. So when the Civil War came in the 1860s, the copper company basically became a government war industry. I don't know what the products they were making. Maybe vessels, maybe they just kept it going, but they were using the sheathing for vessels. So that's why there was a copper company in New Bedford. Later on, it was the Revere Copper, as we probably all remember, and that's why it was here. And Hoadley was the manager of the mill down there for 4 years. And Catherine Hoadley was Herman Melville's sister. So we don't know for sure that Melville ever stayed here. There's no records that he stayed here. But he did have a lecture tour that took him to New Bedford during the years between 1862 and 1866. So the odds that he did stay here, probably pretty high. So that's why it's not a bad attribution to call this building either Melville or the Whalehouse, as it's been called over the years. It's for sale, but it's for sale for a lot of money. 95 Madison Street, built in 1875. This house has, it's a big building. The paint job is nice and clean and stuff, but it really doesn't do justice to the detailing on the outside. But the inside of this house is museum quality interior. Absolutely spectacular spaces, all outsized, all exotic woods around each room. One of the gigantic double parlor on this side, and a small parlor and a magnificent dining room on this side. They spared no expense in the original building of this house as far as the interior detailing is concerned. It's a little intimidating, actually. When you walk through this house, and we had it on the tour a couple of times, actually, and the reaction was, I don't know how anybody could live in there, because the spaces are so big, and it's just it's beautiful. But it would be really, if this house was a house museum, it would be a big hit in the tour. This one here. Yeah, this one here. Now, this one here also is magnificent because I lived in it for 25 years. And I'm glad that I was worried about the paint. The paint was fading badly, but they're painting it a good color. I'm so glad that it's not painting it white. They're actually painting it a nice color. So anyway, this is a great house, 1875. It used to, this house in this style used to be called stick style because of all the ornamentation. Everything that's painted white, it was called stick style. Now that term sort of has fallen out of favor. The old term for it when it was built was called modern Gothic. It's probably more accurate to what it was at the time. This house here is one of probably New Bedford's most exuberant Victorian. Originally, it was a 2-story federal style, nice house that was built in around 1810, actually, by one of the founders in New Bedford, one of the founders' sons in New Bedford. His name is Gilbert Russel. So his name is actually on the plaque, Gilbert Russel. But this is not the Gilbert Russel house. This is a house that was designed by, the design was commissioned by Dr. Abbe. He was Edward Abbe. He was a physician. He moved probably purchased the house in the 1860s and redesigned it into this very fabulous Victorian, really outlandish almost Victorian, very unusual decoration on this house. It's more like a Moorish, Near Eastern style of ornamentation, especially in the doorway and the upsweep of the dormer on the third floor here. Very, very unusual. This house was completely redesigned. There's really it's hard to even imagine what the previous house looked like because there's so much new stuff been added onto it. Added a big cupola on top as well. I haven't been in this house actually for many, many years. It was a convent. I'm sure you remember when it was painted blue for years and years and years when it was a convent. Yeah. And then they sold it to a private party and they painted it a pinkish. I'm not a big fan of pink on Victorians actually. And this isn't pure pink like it was previously, but it's still kind of pink enough. But anyway, it's still a nice house. They did a great job of picking out all the detailing, which I like. So they, the designers and so forth didn't put all that little detail on it, so it could all be painted the same color. It's neat. It was meant to be highlighted and picked out and stuff. They've done a good job with that. It's a nice house. Again, this is a house that's similar to the very first one we looked at with the mansard roof. It would be called the French Second Empire style in the redesign. Dr. Abbe passed away. Again, he owned all of the land behind here as well. When he passed away, his son decided to develop the back of the property into rental housing. So that's how that worked out. But thank God they saved the house. The Women's Center occupied this building for a long time, maybe, 10 or 15 years maybe. And then they got out, and I think it's been sold to private party again. I'm not sure what the official status is of the house right now. Obviously, they're putting alarms in today. But anyway, beautiful house. Always a standout on County Street. The houses were built at the heads of the streets so they could look down the street to the waterfront. That's why the Arnold Mansion and as well was built to look down the street in front of it, which was Spring Street in that case. But that's the way they did it, because none of the streets, when a lot of these houses were built, none of the streets went west at all. They stopped at County Street. There was a great schism in the Quaker religion in the 1820s. There was basically was a liberal viewpoint, and there was a conservative viewpoint. And the conservative viewpoint was the more popular at the time. But two of the Rodmans and Rotchs, they were both Rotchs, and one of them had married Samuel Rodman Sr. They were the symbol of the revolt against it, basically. And they were kicked out of the church. Now, they kicked out the two richest families in town, really, because most of the family members of the Rotchs and the Rodmans left the meeting and joined the Unitarian Church. But the Rodmans didn't. They decided they would hook up with the Episcopal Church. There was an Episcopal chapel on Union Street between 8th and 7th Street, if you're familiar with that area, on the north side of Union. And so the Rodmans were part of that. And later on, when the patriarch of that branch of the family, Samuel Rodman Jr., died, that's his house right there, the children decided to get rid of the old Episcopal Church and build a new one here, right here. And they hired a very, very famous Boston architect by the name of Henry Van Brunt to design the church. Now, Van Brunt was a very, very important architect in this Gothic style. If you are at all interested in architecture, he designed Memorial Hall at Harvard University, one of the greatest Victorian buildings you'll ever see anywhere. Spectacular building. It was a memorial to the Harvard men's deaths during the American Civil War. It's a magnificent building. And not long after he finished that building, he designed this building here. It's a beautiful building. As everybody probably knows, the church caught fire in the 80s, and it was a disaster, but they managed to pull it together and revitalize the church. Did a fantastic job. Really would never know, except from a few signs here and there, that there was ever a fire in there. Beautiful building, very, very Victorian ornamentation on the inside still, really. I mean, for a church, it has some Victorian designs, which are very authentic for the church. Nice building. Van Brunt would be hired by the giant railroad companies out west, Union Pacific and so forth. He moved out west and he designed these gigantic train stations for all the big railroads that were developed. So he left New England not long after he designed Grace Church, which was built around 1880. That is today's tour that I had planned. I hope that you enjoyed it. My pleasure doing it. It's good to see you all come out tonight. Wicked hot day. I thank you for coming. Have a good day.